On this episode of Clone Talk.
Slowly, we ended up taking over the whole house, but it started just in the back bedroom with four lights and some seeds. Because they're like, oh, I had a seed and it was all spindly and never really did anything. And then they come into our shop, and they just see these like beautiful plants. And they're like, oh, here's like a potential I never knew was possible. Because that's really where we can elicit the most change, in my opinion, right? If we are giving out really great genetics and getting people like super high, we're going to change the world, right?
Hey team, Clone Coach here. Are you tired of struggling with your clones? Slow rooting times, purple stems, yellow growth, damping off, and so much more. Now, wherever you are in the world, the best tool to have in your nursery are the Clone Coach SOPs. These SOPs provide step-by-step instructions and expert guidance to get you the best clones ever. Join the team today at clonecoach.com. Welcome to Clone Talk, the past, present, and future of cannabis nurseries through the eyes of industry professionals. On today's episode, we have Jessica joining us. Jessica, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Paul?
I think we're doing good after a little, hiccups there with our technical difficulties. I think we're doing a lot better.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for being patient.
Absolutely. I think this is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a little while. I mean, I've followed, the Clone City and what you guys have been doing for a while. So this is exciting for me. But where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm joining you from our farm in Wellston, Oklahoma, which is about 40 miles northeast of Oklahoma City.
Nice, nice. How's the weather treating you guys out there right now? Is it prime or is it?
Today it's rain. So it's slowing everything up a little bit, but we've been in a drought. So very grateful for the rain today for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you are, truly ingrained, I would assume, in the cannabis culture and industry and everything. But let's take it back a little bit. When did cannabis really become a part of your life, kind of for good?
For good, pretty much my senior year of high school, like many of us, we started, I started smoking weed, and it had already been in my family unit, aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody. So it wasn't like I'd never been exposed to it. But it took till my senior year for me to actually partake. And pretty much right off the bat, I was like, oh, I like this. And when I was a freshman in college, I met my now husband, Chip Baker. He was the president of the Cannabis Action Network. And so really got involved in the activism side of, it was Georgia. So we did try to talk about hemp mostly because we didn't want to get arrested. But we did all sorts of fun things, just trying to bring attention to the cannabis plant to the University of Georgia.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's really having to tread lightly, I assume, during those times, right? I think the stigma and the laws surrounding cannabis in the state of Georgia at that time were pretty thick, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were constantly under threat of being arrested. Even, we would be selling like hemp seed cookies and the cops would come up and be like, what is this? Is this marijuana? Trying to be very like aggro as we're, just like, oh no, this is hemp. Do you want to eat some? And they didn't really know what to think about us, but we did a lot of very, undermining things to the health department and things like that with their propaganda that we would steal from the health department. And so we did tread lightly, but thankfully we were able to accomplish some things.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the power that this plant has to have people advocate and put themselves at risk to a degree of, prosecution or any kind of, effects that way. So it's kudos to this plant that makes us, be such strong advocates here. Puts our freedom at risk at times. So, touching on that, you said, growing up, it wasn't so much of a potential like stigma or negative outlook on cannabis potentially. What was, but you said you were in Georgia at the time also. So maybe touch on how that maybe kind of being pulled in different directions of the stigma and the propaganda of cannabis being illegal kind of affected you.
Yeah, I did buy into the stigma for a while, because the my relatives that did smoke cannabis also did do other drugs and were
Mm,
alcoholics as well. Not all of them, but some of them. So I did see, other drug addiction and alcoholism. So in my young mind, I did pair those together as like this is all, marijuana. Would never use that word now, but my younger self, marijuana is bad and it's caused all of these people to do things that I had really great parents in my opinion, so to see their parents maybe not be as present as my own parents, so
mhm,
I did have the stigma, and then as soon as I smoked it and realized, oh, this has nothing to do, they're doing all things, this has nothing to do with cannabis, right? This is just another one of their vices.
mhm.
And so as I did get older, and I realized, I apologized to a couple of my cousins and I was like, oh, sorry, I was judging you so harshly back then. So it was really like my own, use of cannabis and psychedelics that took me away from the stigma that I did grow up with, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all did, right, to a degree. I mean, that propaganda and that stigma and the DARE program and all that stuff, it worked. It was effective. It
Absolutely.
turned, the country around to give this negative, outlook on this plant. So, it worked. So it's always interesting to hear, how, that kind of affected people, growing up, and people that have gone through those days and kind of turned the tide. So what is it like now being with your family members and stuff, or your loved ones, your friends? What is that lack of stigma, or what is that interaction like nowadays?
Well, now it's hilarious because every relative, whether they ever approved of cannabis or not, send us news articles, and they're always calling to be like, "Oh, did you see this thing about pot?" And "Oh, I hear that CBD treats this." Now everybody wants to talk about it, and
Yep.
some people have even wanted to like, "Should I start my own cannabis business?" And I'm always like, "Well, if you don't love the plant, my answer is going to be no. If you love the plant, then of course you should, But if this is a profit motivated scenario for you, then I'm going to tell you, to F off kind of on some level as a
Yeah.
lover of the plant.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's great though. They all want to talk about it all the time. And it's very freeing. I didn't tell my family about my lifestyle for a long time, and kind of just lied to everybody about what I was doing, and so it feels great to not have to lie anymore.
That's you hit on such a, real fact and real point of view right there, because it's true. I mean, we all were always cautious to really say what we were really passionate about, right? It was always a funny feeling hiding that passion that you love this plant and you're willing to put in all this effort and all this work to, for this plant, but you can't share that with anybody. That was always like the contradiction. That just kind of, for me at least, played with my head a little bit, but like you mentioned, now we're proud to say what we do, and now everybody's flocking to us as like, hey, I saw this article. Hey, what about this? Hey, I have a question. So now you're like the center of the realm there. That's a good change in the right direction, I'd say.
It is, and I just feel like I can be closer to the people who didn't know, because if you always have a barrier up and you're just lying to people, then you can't truly get close. But now it's like we can all truly be ourselves around each other, which is great.
Exactly, exactly. Well, let's transition that kind of personal end of it into the beginning of working with this plant professionally. What did that look like in the early days?
In the early days, it looked so much different than it does now. I will say there's a part of me that really loved the early days. I moved to Humboldt in 1996, or excuse me, 1997. And, 215 passed in 1996. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were already doing this cannabis work in Georgia. And it was like, well, let's go to Humboldt, and where we could actually grow medical cannabis in that gray area that was 215 for so many pleasant years. And so we moved to Humboldt and started growing, first indoors, and then quickly bought some land after a year or so of living there and started growing outdoors. And we put up a greenhouse, and none of our neighbors out on the 36 had greenhouses, and everybody was pissed at us. I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast, but the
Yeah.
neighbors were very upset because we were bringing attention to their outdoor. And we were like, no, your outdoor is bringing attention to my greenhouse because they can't see through it. Therefore,
Right.
they can have all sorts of ideas about what they think it is. But, so that kind of created a stir. And, we were one of the first people out there to also do like a light depth. And just just being part of that culture of it being like all mostly outdoor or, like diesel indoor grows, to then everyone having greenhouses and doing light dip and really just seeing how that shifted. And through all of that, we always had clones. We made our own clones, and also our friends who also had legal medical gardens, we would sell them clones as well.
Absolutely. That's interesting. I mean, hearing about indoor grows, an indoor grow being the first operation you take on, in the late 90s. What was an indoor grow like in the late 90s in Humboldt? What did that look like?
Well, I mean, in Southern Humboldt and people who had been growing outdoor a lot longer, I think it looked a lot bigger than it did for us. We knew people with 40 and 80 lights on a generator, and ours started off very small. We actually bought 4 lights off some tweakers off of the co-op board in Arcata, and they were literally calling for their speed as we were buying their lights, which was really weird for me because I had never really encountered tweakers before. Like, it took me a while to realize that, tweakers it was what we called speed somewhere. I was like, oh no, tweakers are everywhere up here. Okay. But they
Yeah.
sold us my first grow light. So thank you guys. Hope your life turned out better. So it was like 4 lights in a bedroom. And slowly we ended up taking over the whole house, but it started just in the back bedroom with 4 lights and some seeds. And then we did end up getting some clones from a friend of ours and kind of just started from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I mean, how simple things were back then, right?
How much 4 lights could actually do for you back then. It did a lot,
That's a very good point. A spare bedroom was, essentially a full-time income, especially during those times with what salaries were and stuff like that. I mean, a spare bedroom was a full-time salary with
Absolutely.
part-time hours, right? And I would even argue that lasted up until maybe 2015, 16, starting to die off 2018 or so. Like the peak started to come down. It's a little bit tougher to do that, especially nowadays. But
Yeah.
that's what I did too. When I was leaving my corporate career, I turned a spare bedroom and I replaced my salary with that. And I said, well, look, I'm doing what I love. Replace my salary. I'm jumping in. So let's bring this up to where we're kind of at today. What is your current role and the business you're working with?
So we do a few things out here in Oklahoma now. We have a clone nursery. It was a medical dispensary that specialized in clones. And so I was selling clones to medical patients and to commercial growers. And, retail is not my favorite thing. I've always been more of as I'm an acupuncturist, so practitioner, like medicine maker and wholesaler. I was never much on the retail side of things. And so it wasn't my favorite thing. But I do love like spreading the joy of cannabis to people. And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I really just decided I wanted to focus mostly on the commercial growers, because that's really where we can elicit the most change, in my opinion, right? If we are giving out really great genetics and getting people like super high, we're going to change the world, right? Because people are going to, hopefully start caring about things that matter the most.
Are you a cannabis grower looking for reliable and accurate pathogen testing for your plants? Look no further than Flora DNA. Their state-of-the-art lab offers testing for hop latent viroid, fusarium, as well as other pathogens that can cause harm to your crops. Trust them to provide you the information that you need to ensure the health of your plants. And for a limited time, use discount code CloneCoach at checkout for up to 20% off your entire order. Don't let pathogens ruin your crop. Choose My Flora DNA for all of your cannabis testing needs. Now back to the show.
So now we just mostly do contract clones at this point. We also have our own farm. So we start a bunch of seeds and pheno hunt for the next clones or the next mother plants that we want to make clones out of to kind of overgrow, right? Back in the day, we always talked about overgrowing the government. And I will say we absolutely achieved that goal. And then some, maybe to some detriment, maybe to not, that's up for debate. But Oklahoma has definitely overgrown anything it could possibly supply to the people of Oklahoma. And so I take a lot of joy in knowing that at least some of those growers were growing our strains, and well, not our strains, but what we chose to perpetuate out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. And we also have a processing facility. So thankfully, with our biomass that we don't sell as flour, we also make into concentrates. So kind of do a little bit of everything right now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you're on point where you could affect more change by supplying commercial grows, because they're requesting plants in the thousands, right? I don't know what the limit is for medical patients in Oklahoma, but call it a dozen or less. It's a lot tougher, a lot longer struggle, and retail is its own beast, because the biggest variable is people, and that variable is one of the toughest things to deal with, right? That's just not an easy thing to do. Customer service, retail, that customer facing role is not always the easiest thing to do. But I was always fascinated, or always liked the idea of growing clones in the back in the warehouse and selling them in the front. So were there any kind of positive things you saw in that time?
Oh, it was awesome. I mean, what I loved about it was people coming in and seeing plants for the first time, or seeing plants that they've never seen that healthy looking. Because they're like, oh, I had a seed and it was all spindly and never really did anything. And then they come into our shop, and they just see these beautiful plants, and they're like, oh, here's a potential I never knew was possible, and then we would sell them when they were already, 6, 8, 10, 14 inches, depending on, the stage of the plant. And so it gave them a leg up to oh, this plant's actually going to survive. And then thankfully, my husband owns Cultivate Garden Supply, which was 2 doors down. So then it was oh, and you don't know, because people would come in and they wouldn't know they needed a light. They needed nutrients. They needed to pH their water, all of, they just thought they were going to, oh, I'm just going to go stick this outside. And I'm like, it's February. You can't go just stick this outside, And so I loved just seeing the look in people's eyes when they saw that they had several different, cultivars to choose from. And then also just the excitement that they had. And then I could go tell them to go spend money at my husband's shop, which, so that was a win-win too.
Absolutely.
But And I do love talking to people. I actually liked talking to the patients more than I like talking to the growers. I am a grower, and I've been one for a long time, and you have too. So, there's a lot of ego that goes along with growers, which is almost par for the course. And the patients, they had a humbleness to them that I really liked. And just that eagerness to learn something new.
Yeah, you're bringing back some memories, because when during the Prop 215 days, I used to provide clones for patients as well, as a balance between patients and dispensaries for the retail end, and then wholesale as well for cultivators. And you're right. I mean, medical patients always have this different energy to them, where they're just it's their little 6 plant grow or 12 plant grow or little 2 light setup, but it's there's so much energy and effort being put into that, because that's their entire realm of growing. And there was just a lot of appreciation and stuff when it came to providing plants directly to medical patients, which is something I miss. But that's why I'm always eager to help in other ways and provide value in other ways too. You know, gotta transition with this industry, right? There's a lot of different changes happening.
Oh yeah, you have to transition. And if, my husband laughs at me all the time because it's not as much fun as it used to be. It really is not. I mean, I am grateful for the opportunities, absolutely, and I think we need to decriminalize on every level. But it's definitely not as much fun.
That's a real point. That's a real accurate point. But let's get into some fun stuff. I mean, stuff that that people that are in the gardens are dealing with or are curious about. So let's get your point of view on some things like seeds or genetics. I know you said you're popping some seeds at your farm or for the nursery and things. So what's on your kind of purview when it comes to seeds and genetics nowadays?
For us, we still kind of go with the tried and true that we've always used and liked. We have friends that are breeders, and so we like to use their seeds now that we have a metric in OMMA, and because I did have a retail store. I had a lot of seeds in my stock that I could bring into metric, which was awesome.
Hmm.
Because that's now kind of a little bit more of a challenge than it was. We also do make our own seeds that we just kind of use for us. We don't sell to anybody. Yeah. I don't call myself a breeder, but we do like to make a lot of seeds, but I'm absolutely not in the realm of seed breeder. And nor do I want to be, but we love to make seeds. It's super fun. I'm one of the few people who like males, males when it comes to the cannabis plant. Although we have reverted some of our, females to make seeds. But right now, like, just if I can shout out my favorite, if people that I trust when it comes to seeds, are Archive Seed Bank, one of the best breeders, and just he has the most incredible genetics. And
Hmm.
when you buy feminized seeds from him, very, very low herms and males, which is really important if you're going to buy feminized seeds. I also really like 707 seeds, Archive Seed Bank, 707. I do like the Humboldt Seed Company. They're really great people as well. And I like the Swamp Boy seeds. Yeah, and those are kind of the ones I trust the most. I mean, I have bought seeds from other companies, and I've found great seed out of them. But those are the ones that I just go back to over and over. Um, and because of Instagram now, there's just so many influencers, as we know,
Hmm.
and it's really hard to discern who the real breeders are and who are just buying a bunch of seeds from Spain and then white labeling, right? Because that's so common. Is people are just everyone has an ice cream cake, everyone has an OG Kush or whatever it is, and then you're like, well, did you actually do any of this breeding, or are you just you know buying them from Spain and then white label it, which I'm not saying is bad or good or wrong or right, but you just never know who's actually a breeder these days and who's just selling seeds, and calling themselves the breeder of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think that's something that people need to recognize in the industry. I mean, breeding and calling yourself a breeder and dedicating yourself to that craft takes a lot of time, energy, and resources, patience, mistakes, things that just don't make the cut, right? So there's a lot that goes into being a real, true breeder. But I like your kind of point of view too, where you're like, look, you're not portraying yourself as a breeder, but you're also enjoying the fact that you're able to make seeds and you enjoy that process too. So maybe what are some, excuse me, what are some tips or tricks that you could share with the audience that are interested in just making seeds for fun as well?
So for me, if you're not trying to sell seeds and call yourself a breeder, there's nothing wrong with making seeds. For me, I'm like, everybody make your own seeds. Just try it. It's fun. Where the concern comes in is if you're just making a bunch of seeds and then, selling them by the thousands, then all of a sudden you're just perpetuating one, not so great genetics,
Right.
and two, a bunch of hermaphrodite plants. So then you're messing people's gardens up, which is not cool. And on a if on a personal scale, it's like, whatever. But on a commercial scale, you could ruin somebody's entire garden by
Mm-hmm.
selling them some shitty seeds.
Mm-hmm.
But I always encourage people to make their own for fun. Why not? Try it, pop a bunch of seeds. And then, if you see a male that you like those characteristics and you see a female and you like those characteristics, by all means, let them hang out together for a few weeks. And then just, you can kind of follow the lifetime of those seeds just to see, one, how diverse those phenotypes are going to be, right? Because you're going to get at least 4 or 5 different phenos. And then you can, choose what you personally like best. Because maybe you do want tall and spindly over short and fat. Or maybe you do want, oh, this one has like really broad leaves and this one has really narrow leaves. Or whatever it is you're looking for. Maybe you'll find it if you make your own seeds,
Absolutely. What are some when is the best time to introduce the male to the female during flower? And is there a time to remove the male during the flowering process during those 8 to 10 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, normally what we'll do is we will put the male in there in full, like we kind of start to flower them in separate spaces. Not that this is the right or only way to do it. This is
Mm-hmm.
just the way we typically will do it. Was we'll start flowering the male and we'll start flowering the female. And then we'll introduce the male at around 3-4 weeks and then let it hang out in there for like 2 or 3, we'll let it hang out in there for like, you normally, right as you're starting to see the hairs kind of start to form and there is the bud, but it's not like, there's kind of where it's still more hairy than fat buds,
Uh-huh.
So then we'll stick it in there for like, I mean, normally we'll just stick ours in there until the pollen stops dropping. So it can be 2 weeks. Sometimes we're like, fuck it, we're just going to leave it in here until we decide to chop it down. I'm not very scientific in my approach. I don't keep, and very occasionally I'll keep a log about it. But like I said, I just kind of experiment and see what works. We'll like paint it on there. We'll shake it on there. We kind of let it get fully covered. You do need a good like 4 or 5 weeks to let the seeds mature. So you can't do it too late or the seeds won't mature. So you just kind of have to find that like spot in there where if you have like a 9-week strain or a 10-week strain, you want to make sure that it's been pollinated for at least 4 weeks, just so the seed actually matures in there.
Yeah, great points there. That should help some people out there just to like, get their plant in there. And like you said, keep it simple. You shouldn't really have to overcomplicate these things. This will naturally occur if they're just right next to each other. Just keep the plant happy and the rest should start to work itself out.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. Real quick, I know you can make a lot of seeds off of a plant. Is there like a round number that you generally get like in a per square foot or per plant? Like how many seeds do you end up? And I'm sure there's a ratio of mature and then maybe, immature or just, maybe 3 tiers of the seed quality or something perhaps. But on average, how many seeds can you get?
I mean, hundreds to thousands. We just did a greenhouse. We just seeded a greenhouse. And there were probably, how many plants were in there? I don't know, maybe 30 or 40. And we're probably going to have around 15,000 seeds.
Wow.
And that wasn't a great, and and that was kind of a willy-nilly experiment. That wasn't us trying too hard, or we really put the males in the front of the room. We put a couple in the middle, and then we were like, all right, we'll see what happens. And we were actually surprised. I didn't think we were going to get that many because we didn't really try that hard. So really, you can get a lot of seeds without trying very hard.
That's awesome. Yeah, that should help inspire some people to really take on their seed projects here.
Yes, take on the seed project. Just don't sell the seeds the first time you go out and you're like, I made a bunch of seeds. Now I can sell them. It's like, sure you can, but are they going to be great genetics? Are they going to be viable seeds? Are you just going to herm out somebody's garden? Like, I like a little bit, like we do it willy nilly, or I do it because I'm not selling them. Somebody else, I would hope there was a little bit more consciousness put into it,
Yeah, absolutely. That's reinforced the fact that you always want to start out in a hobby before you start, sharing whatever you're making, really, no matter what it is you're doing. Go through that process of, the trials and tribulations and tweaking and figuring everything out before you offer it to sell for somebody else, right? And I'm glad we're on that same page there, because that's like a mindset of like reputation and thinking long term versus a short term, one-off kind of a sale deal that you just came up on somebody. Here's some seeds, decent price, there you go, but you get what you get. So hopefully everybody out there is going about it the right way. Let's see here. Let's transition a bit more into tissue culture. Are you doing anything with tissue culture presently or previously?
No, we are not doing anything with tissue culture, and not that I wouldn't love to at some point in the future. Absolutely, but currently we are not doing anything with tissue culture. I've studied it a little bit, and I know a couple people who say they're doing it. But then when I look at it, I'm like, I don't think this is truly tissue culture, what you're doing. I think you're just taking microclones. So micro cloning is now what people are calling tissue culture, and I'm not well versed enough to know. But to me, it seems like those are two different things.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong in that sense, because people do just take a micro clone, root it, and kind of use it for genetic storage, but it's not. I think, like you said, there's confusion between what tissue culture could offer people. That could be genetic storage, just to store that genetic in a small size plant for a long period of time, but also genetic cleanup, and that's really the hot topic of eliminating viruses and viroids from your plant material. And to do that, that is what true meristem tissue culture is all about. That is taken down to the smallest, freshest cell size that you can from this plant, from the meristem, taking that through the process. And that's going to be, maybe 9-month process before you get something viable enough to transplant and start vegging out, before you can start propagating that and putting that back into rotation. Like, it's a year-long process, for a rough number. And I think that's the real meristem tissue culture. But you're right, there is, micro cloning and taking tissue culture for storage, but it's not that genetic cleanup. And some people may get confused or not be knowledgeable enough to know to ask, the differences in what the material is. Introducing the new DLI CRI series UV 150 watt DE. This unique product has been developed to complement the existing HPS and LED spectrum. The UV 150 watt is designed to provide the plant with UV light. The wide flood reflector makes this light perfect for every growing situation. Complete your light spectrum and grow the highest quality crop. And because the UV light can be controlled effortlessly using the DLI controllers. It fits perfectly into your current grow light system. UVA, UVB, and C, protecting the plant against bacteria and insects. Grow Dutch or go home. Visit growworld.com or the link below to join the trial today. Are there a lot
Well, and then there's so much misinformation on the internet too. So, one person says it and then 20 people regurgitate it and then it becomes truth. And, that's one of my biggest beefs with the cannabis industry, are just the BS that gets thrown around as truth, Yeah. And then at some point you're almost like, well, let me just give in, I guess, because enough people now believe it. And therefore it's part of the culture,
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's like, I agree with you. And, I think that's why, like, subconsciously I like producing these types of pieces of content, because it opens up the conversation and doesn't just allow a myth to remain a myth, or just something that's, been said forever to just go untested, right? Or just unanalyzed and see, well, is that really the truth? Let's just try to tweak things a little bit or find out for ourselves. So things like this conversation is going to help people just ask the question. And when you ask the question, that opens up the book, and it just doesn't allow for all these assumptions to keep carrying on.
Yep, absolutely.
Is there?
So thank you for the podcast.
Yeah, this is fun. This is fun stuff. What about testing? Are there a lot of testing facilities out there in Oklahoma for the viroid? Did they pop up recently? And what's the kind of whole outlook on the viroid out there in Oklahoma?
A lot of people talk about it, especially, but there's a bunch of Facebook groups. So I see it on the groups, a lot of people talking about it. And supposedly there's one lab here in Oklahoma City that is, or somewhere in Oklahoma, I think it's in the city, are trying to offer, the HPVL testing, or I think that's the acronym for it. But no one in Oklahoma is doing it yet.
Interesting.
And so, per our law, we can't send out a plant sample to an out-of-state lab, even though, the FDA has their whole thing about what they're saying. But in Oklahoma, we're legally not, if we can't do a metric transfer of of a piece of the plant material, then we can't send it off to a lab that says they do testing. So there are clone nurseries here that claim they do the testing. I don't see legally how they're doing it. Maybe they're sending it to an out-of-state lab, or maybe they're just bullshitting and say they have the test. I don't know. But as a owner of a clone nursery, I haven't found anybody in Oklahoma that is doing the testing. And legally, I can't send mine out to someone out of state. So I haven't done any testing because there's nowhere for me to test in Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wasn't aware of that regulation that prohibited, operators from sending really just a piece of a leaf or a piece of a stem, in the smallest little vial to a testing laboratory to conduct these tests, right? I wasn't aware that was. They're
not an OMMA business, and they have to be in an OMMA licensed business for us to do any transfer of anything.
Wow. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I believe they're starting to come out with, they're already out there, but the actual equipment, to do your own on-site testing. What the capital investment is, I am unaware. But I know nurseries here in California are starting to rely less on shopping around with a bunch of labs. And some of them, since they have so much material to test, are starting to, buy their own equipment and test in-house. But that I'm sure has its own learning curve. And they still test that same material with other labs so that they could kind of just cross-reference and making sure that their results are accurate as well. So that's very interesting. I was not aware that Oklahoma, hindered you guys when it came to that kind of testing. So being that the fact,
and it's one of those areas of, I'm sure I could do it, but trying to play by the rules here.
Absolutely. I mean, for so many years of being cowboys and cowgirls, we're starting to play by the rules nowadays, right?
Yeah, the outlaw nature is hard to break, but yes, absolutely. Got to play by the rules. They're going to, give you a license. You might as well not piss it away, right?
Exactly. And speaking on the rules in Oklahoma right now, I assume there's correct me if I'm wrong, there's some more legislation passing, so there's going to be some changes in the rules and the operations in Oklahoma?
The new legislative session just started, and I hear there's 99 different cannabis things that are coming up in this session. I don't know if that's an exaggeration or not, but we already had a moratorium put into place recently, so 2-year moratorium on any licenses except for researcher and education and labs. But if you wanted to be a grower or a processor or a dispensary, there's a moratorium now. We do have legalization coming up March 7th. There's a special election to see if Oklahoma will vote to legalize and not just have medical. So that's definitely coming up that we're looking at. And they recently tiered our licenses as well. Before it was one price for all licenses. And now for growers and processors, they get tiered up depending on how much square footage you have as a grower or how much product you are producing as a processor.
Interesting. So that recreational coming March 7th, is that a shoe-in? Is that going to happen, or are you still waiting for that voting session?
Yeah, we're definitely waiting. It's really interesting how many of the cannabis business owners here don't want legalization, which doesn't really make sense to me because we have overgrown the Oklahoma medical population, and there's a lot of people unable to sell products. So
Hmm.
they seem to think like Marlboro or somebody's going to come in and like take up all the business here as soon as we legalize. But to me, it's just going to help all of these small business people who don't have enough clients to have more clients, especially like Dallas is like 8 million people and only 3 hours from Oklahoma City. It's only like an hour from the border, 40 minutes. So to me, knowing you have Dallas and all of Texas at your disposal, to me, I would think more people would want legalization here so they would have more clientele. But they're kind of looking at it as the opposite, as it would be a threat to their business.
That's interesting, because staying medical has more limitations nowadays, just even as these markets evolve, right? And California is having talks about interstate commerce, and there's other states that have mentioned it previously, and that's starting to become a conversation. And, so staying medical and staying hindered to your own market, there's only so much consumption, like you said, that will happen there. There's only so much of a population that consumes, and there's a limit there. And if the amount of licenses that popped up in Oklahoma, I mean, that product's got to go somewhere. Why wouldn't you be open to, like you said, more customers, a bigger customer base, and that eventually leads to the potential conversation of being part of interstate commerce as well, right? You can't do that if it's medical.
Right. And it's like they didn't want metric in Oklahoma either. They were like, it's a monopoly. And I'm thinking, yeah, but if we have interstate commerce, then we're all on the same system already. And it's going to make
Hmm.
it so much easier in the long run. So I think, people are scared of it for whatever reason. And but I would much rather it just be decriminalized than legalized for a slew of reasons. But, I mean, we got to keep legalizing it. We can't just keep saying, I mean, yes, it is a medicine and I wholeheartedly believe that, but we also have to say it's okay if we just want to get high. Just like it's okay if we
Yeah.
want to have a beer, like we just need to
Yeah.
make it more readily available to everyone.
Yeah. I mean, less interference. Just get out of the way. Put a simple, basic tax where we could all understand it. Let America do what America does with the new industry. I
Right.
was just watching some history stuff on prohibition and like the titans of the early centuries of America and stuff. And if you just let Americans do what we're gonna do, let the industry speak for itself. I mean, there's already should be zero reason why you would hold this plant in Schedule 1 state scheduling. There's no reason why Americans can't responsibly consume this. There's already been proven markets throughout the country. Just get out of the way. Let us pay a simple single digit tax, and let us open up a small business that doesn't require $5 million, in the bank or anything like that, or lobbying council members and things like that. Like, let's just get a simple license, get a warehouse, have a product, and if we survive, we survive, and if we don't, all right, we had our shot.
Right. We tried.
Yeah. So let's take that into kind of your business nowadays. You said you're focusing more on commercial scale operators. What are they really demanding out there? Are they liking to stick with clones, or are they requesting teens or ready to flower plants, or what's that kind of market talking about?
Yeah, there's a couple different markets. I feel like the greenhouse and outdoor markets, they want teens. They want plants that they can go and put in the ground or put in their greenhouse without much veg time
Hmm.
and go. So they want the teens. I have a lot of indoor growers who just want them straight in Rockwool cubes because they're hydro growers, and maybe they'll go and put it in cocoa, but more than likely they're just going to go put it in a bigger Rockwool slab.
Hmm.
And so those people just want the clones. People are, I will say, on average, people are pretty cheap here, thrifty. So even if they do want, teens, no one really wants to pay much for plants these days. And I get it on some level because the cost of a pound of flour is really low here because there's like a lot of really low quality growers, or they're growing low quality genetics or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Some people do want seeds, but early on, I think a couple of big growers here got burned with some really bad seeds. And so I was hearing about seeds in the past, and now I hear like, oh my God, no, I don't want seeds. Or they see my Instagram pictures because they see I talk about seeds and the clones, and they're like, you've tried these, right? These are all the same. I'm like, these aren't seeds. Because there were a couple nurseries here who didn't know anything about, or maybe they did know something about growing cannabis, but they were literally starting seeds and selling them as clones because they didn't know what a clone was.
Wow.
This is this is an ignorant market. That's not like, man, you're from Cali, man. Cali's a totally different beast.
Yeah.
And even Colorado is a different beast. Oklahoma knew nothing about commercial cannabis on that scale. Yes, of course, people have been growing here forever, but just what we know is like, oh, a clone nursery means you only sell from mother plants that a clone is consistent. It's identical, right?
Yeah.
Because it came off the same mom, but people weren't selling that here. They were opening clone nurseries and selling seeds. And so people
Wow.
did not have good experiences with that because they ended up with Mel's, they ended up with Herms, they ended up with a huge variety of quality when they thought they were getting clones, you know. And so it has been very, I've educated a lot of people, and it's been very educating for me just to see, because I did come from Humboldt and had a different idea of what people knew about, that was the Mecca at that time. That's where everyone went because that's the only place you could go.
Yeah.
And it's just not like that anymore. So I just assumed people knew what a clone was. And then I was like, oh no, people don't know what a clone is. You have to like explain it to them. And then have to assure people that no, I do know what a clone is, and I'm not selling you a seed as a clone.
That's astonishing to hear. That is the maybe it's still not the it's maybe not currently the state, but that was the state of the knowledge base of nursery operators in that state. That's like you said, coming from California, that's just like shocking to hear. Like, how would you ever try to pull that off? Like, just looking at the lot, they would all be different sizes, and the structure of a seedling is different from a clone. Like, huh,
Yeah,
that
but the growers didn't know any better, and the nursery owner didn't know any better because they both just got into it because it's $2,500 for a license. So why wouldn't you get a license here if it, would only cost you $2,500 a year? And so people just saw opportunities and took them without educating themselves about the industry.
So with that being the case, have you noticed, now that it's been a couple years of, these operations, at least, are you noticing people starting to go out of business, or, shops just not surviving, just taking a swing at this?
Yeah, absolutely. Businesses going out, people going out of business all the time, and selling their businesses now that there's a moratorium. The business license cost has increased because now no one, you can't go to OMMA and get one, but you can buy a license off somebody.
Mm.
Um, So I do see a lot of people and just shifting ideas. I met quite a few people who were working in the oil fields or had some other corporate job and took out the 401k, started a big warehouse, and within a year had spent all their money, had nothing in savings, and now had to shut down.
Wow.
So I love the gung ho attitude, man. People are like gung ho, but it's also like it takes a little bit more than just, oh, any stoner can do this, because it's just weed. And that's a big attitude too that people had here, was like, oh, anybody can do this. This is easy. And it's like, it's not. And then you throw in, the tax debacle on top of it, and it's definitely not easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what you mentioned in the earlier part of the conversation, where if you just went into this for money, the majority of the time, what you just described is going to be your outcome, right? Where you say, hey, I have X amount of dollars, I'm going to turn it into Y amount, I'm at 3X, 5X my investment, give me 2 years, and I'm cashing out, and it's all rainbows and sunshines, right? But then reality hits in, and just like anything else, if we jumped into an industry that we have no idea about, that's just emerging, and you pour your life savings into it, that's a giant risk, right? Like you mentioned earlier, you need to be, the best advice is to be passionate about the plant if you want to get into this business, because that's what's going to keep you there, really dissecting all the inputs that plant is receiving, the room, the environment, how that plant is feeling, the stressors to weather, all these things, right? Where you're not just, it's not a widget. You can't just plant it and say in 8 weeks, I'm going to harvest $1 million. Yeah. If you let your guard down during those 8 weeks, then you may have some issues.
Well, and even, people like us, right? We've been in it a long time, and it's still not easy for us, right?
Right.
We are struggling just like maybe not as much as the people who didn't know anything about it, but it hasn't proven to be easy for any of us, so there should be a passion there. Otherwise, you're just kind of making yourself miserable. It's like, it's fun for a minute until you realize that you had one failed crop after another.
Exactly. Well, and that's the reality. That's the truth. Those situations will play themselves out, and that's the good and bad of just letting the market kind of do its thing. I think Oklahoma was the best example we could see, where, like you said, the licenses are $2,500 and there's really no major oversight, and before Metric even got there and stuff. So it was really up to you to put your best foot out there, to try to make something happen. But if you don't survive, that's the reality of it.
Yeah. And, I feel really badly for a lot of the people I sold clones to for a year or two, and then heard their story as the years evolved. And, I wish I would have had better advice for them, but some of them I didn't feel that bad for, because I'm like, yeah, you thought any stoner could do it, and you dissed all stoners this whole time while you tried to profit off a plant that stoners love. So,
Yeah.
know.
So are there less and less nurseries as well, since there's less, cultivators, A, requesting plants because they're in operation, and B, paying a decent price for them because they're receiving decent prices, or actually moving product?
I mean, I almost think there's more nurseries now than there were before. And because I know a couple people who used to buy clones from me ended up, I see their clone list, and I'm like, oh, cool. You took every clone you got from me and started your own nursery, which is awesome. They're totally allowed to do that. I'm never going to tell anybody ever what they can do with a plant that they get from me. That's not my right. But I think there are more nurseries now, only because I get more emails and, from nurseries in Oklahoma. And I don't know if they're just savvy people with, like, maybe it's one nursery and they're sending out 2 or 3 different emails. But when I started my nursery, I was the only clone nursery, and then one more opened up, and now I feel like I can at least think of 4 or 5 that I get emails from. So I still don't think there's a huge amount, and I don't know how well they're doing, But I think that maybe their first business idea didn't turn out and they were like, oh, I can make money off a clone nursery. And so they've switched to being a clone nursery. Or they're like us and we grow a lot of cannabis and we loved to have our own clones. And so, yes, we sell a lot of clones to other people, but the main purpose of our clone nursery is to make sure we always have the clones that we want, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, I mean, I've been in those situations where, a flower room isn't making money for whatever reason, crop loss, bad operators, poor genetics, environments, bud rot, things of that nature. But when you pencil out the numbers, it's another reason why I'm a huge fan of nurseries, because when you pencil out the numbers, revenue per square foot, your cost of goods, your less electrical load that you require for that room, the more consistent cash flow because you're harvesting a clone every 2 weeks. I really, really love the economics of operating a nursery. And maybe that's why some people turned off flower room, left the lights on, kept it in the bedroom, and started selling clones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I don't blame them. I've been selling clothes for decades, and it's always been a good business model, you know.
Yep. Yep. I love it. I love it. I'm a fan. I've always done it too. When I was starting up my first room, I got stuck when I needed to fill it with clones. Couldn't find a clone source. When I finally sourced genetics from friends and family or a dispenser here and there, I started making my own. Like I didn't even switch the room to flower like I intended to, because I just saw such a gap there, and I never looked back after that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. We're getting close to the end of the show here, but I want to get your outlook, your point of view on what the future looks like for cannabis nurseries. I mean, we got a lot of factors at play, right? We have potential interstate commerce. We have, just the new technology that's coming out, nowadays, AI. We got social media at play. We have possibly other countries, that are legalizing that we may do business with in the future. What do you think the future of cannabis nurseries looks like?
I mean, I think the future for cannabis nurseries is immense, like on a scale that we probably couldn't even fathom if we were allowed to do. I mean, and I know it's kind of that gray area now with being able to sell clones online and all of that. But if we could actually advertise like people like other plant nurseries could and things like that, I think the possibilities are endless. I think you know having a plant nursery of really select genetics um, that you could then sell to any state or any country that was that would allow that transfer to happen. I think there would be more and more clone nurseries opening up as soon as that would be a possibility. Because why wouldn't you? If you could then
Right.
like safely and legally sell across state lines and across borders, I think it would be great. And I do believe we would see a lot more clone nurseries opening up. Um, but in its
Well,
current state, I think, go ahead.
I was like, if those nurseries open up, they should really reach out to one of us for some advice prior to opening up.
Well, absolutely. We would hope that would happen, but I mean, I know a lot of like even here, a big plant nursery became a clone nursery, but it was still different than a plant nursery, right? And
Hmm.
so, and it ended up not really going that well for them. So I do think they should get some advice if you are going to just try to create, if you are a big plant nursery that's then going to switch over to a cannabis nursery. There's always things that you should know. Like you can't just sell. You can buy a pack of like violet seeds, and every plant would pretty much be the same in these days. But you can't do that with a cannabis seed, and I don't think that's where nurseries quite understand yet.
Right, right. Sourcing their initial stock of genetics, keeping that menu on a rotation, keeping those genetics fresh, staying current with the times, yet keeping things that are tried and true for operators. There's a lot that goes into building the right
Yep.
menu and keeping that menu fresh year after year, season after season. And
Yeah.
especially if you're
And
doing
some of the like, yeah,
indoor
especially as an
nursery
indoor
versus greenhouse
nursery.
nursery as well.
Yeah, and for us it was great because we had an indoor nursery and a greenhouse nursery. So when it comes time for the season for people who grow in greenhouses or outdoor, it's like, oh yeah, we've already had plants that have been growing in this greenhouse for 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
Hmm.
however long they've
Hmm.
been there. So already acclimated to the growing environment, at least somewhat that somebody's looking for. Um, and just to say this about genetics real quick, especially for those who want to open a clone nursery, is
Yeah.
just because it's popular in the moment doesn't mean it's a great plant for commercial growers to grow for production. And I think that's also where it kind of gets lost because growers are like, do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have this? It's like that plant kind of sucks as a commercial grow, as for something you want to grow commercially. Like it's great if you just want to have this like super heady weed. Or maybe it's not even super heady, but some influencer talked about it and now we're convinced it's great. And then you look at the pictures online and you're like, that's like a quarter of an ounce on that plant that somebody's calling fire. Like to me, especially as a commercial grower, that I'm not going to look at that because it's not, I can't, well, one, unfortunately, you do have to have some sort of profit in a business. So it's not profit driven motivation. But it might also like really not be that great, but people hadn't smoked really great weed yet. So they don't realize that that's not really great. It's like, okay, but somebody put a great graphic on it and then, had a viral video and all of a sudden everyone thinks it's great. And so that's definitely a shift in the cannabis culture that I've seen.
I agree with you 100%. There's definitely strains that are excellent producers, really easy to grow for commercial operators that just really thrive in these environments. And like you said, some strains are just hyped up names. And once you put them into production, you're not going to hit that 2-3 pound of light that you penciled out in your spreadsheet. You're not going to hit that fast flower time. You're not going to hit all these other metrics that you built into your cultivation business with certain genetics. So my best advice would be just to dedicate a small section of a room and really track your data to really see if you want to scale that up and dedicate an entire room or multiple rooms of a genetic. If you're willing to take those hits and understand that genetic, do you. But like you said, only because it has a hyped up name does not mean it's an excellent producer for cultivators.
Right. So yeah, like grow your own head stash. Absolutely. Because we all want a great head stash. But if you want to be a producer of, a lot of cannabis, sometimes you have to, have another great genetic that also happens to be a little heavier.
Absolutely. Well, Jessica, this has been fun. Thank you so much for joining us on Clone Talk today. This has been a great episode. Where can the audience learn a bit more about you, about your business, and how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can look me up. I need to be more active on social media, but at the Clone City, and then also my website, clone-city.com, and then bakerbotanica.com as well.
Awesome. Awesome. So if anybody's out in the Oklahoma market looking for some killer genetics from a solid nursery that's been around, operating, doing their thing since the cowboy days in California and Humboldt, reach out to Jessica and the Clone City. That's going to do it for today's episode of Clone Talk. I hope you gained some value by listening from these stories from Jessica's point of view. And if you're ready to make the best clones ever and you're looking for expert guidance and step-by-step instructions, head over to clonecoach.com where I offer SOPs for clones and mother plants. That's going to do it for today's episode. Jessica, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Attention licensed operators in California. Are you looking for high quality nursery stock? Look no further than Refined Genetics. They provide top-notch clones, teens, and seeds to ensure the success of your operation. No order is too big. For a limited time, use discount code CLONECOACH for 10% off your first order. Don't miss out on this opportunity to secure a solid nursery partner. Contact sales@refinedgenetics.co. And yes, it's .co, not .com. Catch you on the next episode of Clone Talk. Do you want to be a guest on Clone Talk? It's easy. Just send me an email. heyclonecoach@gmail.com. We'll get you all set up. I look forward to having you on the next episode.